again, I think that's a very powerful point that he ends on in this particular section, to never forget that for 250 years, Black people in this country were born into chains. Whole generations followed more generations who knew nothing but chains. And if you don't, as one of the famous quotes says, those who forget their history, those who forget the lessons of history, are doomed to repeat that history. And I find it very interesting that the Ashkenazis, right, the Ashkenazim, the European Jews, are now coming to the forefront and really making noise about anti-Semitism. Well, why are they doing that? And why is nobody telling them all lives matter when they are pushing Jewish lives matter? Because they are. Why is nobody on their case saying, well, all lives matter? We know all lives matter. Because they are being loud about it. They are coming together as a community and they are saying this is unacceptable. We are not going to tolerate this. We see where this is going. And they're pushing back on these anti-Semitism and these anti-Semitic things that are happening in the United States. There is a consistent pushback. And so one thing that I'm taking from this section of the reading today is that you cannot be afraid to make other people uncomfortable while you are advocating for your own rights in this society as a human being. You can't be afraid to make people uncomfortable with the notion that you are human and you deserve rights like everyone else. Because remember, as he says here to his son, never forget that we were enslaved in this country longer than we have been free. And as you can see from lots of things happening with these appointments and in the media, there are some people who will happily send you back to chains and ask you to be quiet about it. So we cannot be quiet about what matters to us concerning our humanity. And good morning to those who are watching live. I know some people are coming in and out and will catch the replay, and that's fine. So we're going to go on to the second section of the book for today and continue our second half of the reading. Our world is full of sound. Our world is more lovely than anyone's. Though we suffer and kill each other and sometimes fail to walk the air, we are beautiful people with African imaginations, full of masks and dancing and swelling chants. With African eyes and noses and arms, though we sprawl in gray chains in a place full of winters when what we want is the sun. Amiri Baraka. Shortly before you were born, Ta-Nehisi writes to his son, I was pulled over by the PG County Police, the same police that all of the DC poets had warned me of. They approached on both sides of the car, shining their flashlights through the windows. They took my identification and returned to the squad car. I sat there in terror. But by then I had added to the warnings of my teachers what I'd learned about PG County through reporting and reading the papers. And so I knew that the PG County Police had killed Elmer Clay Newman, then claimed he'd rammed his own head into the wall of a jail cell. And I knew that they'd shot Gary Hopkins and said he'd gone for an officer's gun. And I knew they had beaten Freddie McCollum half blind and blamed it all on a collapsing floor. And I had read reports of these officers choking mechanics, shooting construction workers, slamming suspects through the glass doors of shopping malls. And I knew that they did this with a great regularity, as though moved by some unseen cosmic clock. I knew that they shot at moving cars, shot at the unarmed, shot through the backs of men, and claimed that it had been they who'd been under fire. These shooters were investigated, exonerated, and promptly returned to the streets, where so emboldened, they shot again. At that point in American history, no police department fired its guns more than that of Prince George's County. The FBI opened multiple investigations, sometimes in the same week. The police chief was rewarded with a raise. I replayed all of this sitting there in my car in their clutches. Better to have been shot in Baltimore where there was the justice of the streets and someone might call the killer to account. But these officers had my body, could do with my body whatever they pleased, and should I live to explain what they had done with it, this complaint would mean nothing. The officer returned. He handed back my license. He gave no explanation for the stop. Then that September, I picked up the Washington Post and saw that the PG County Police had killed again. I could not help but think that this could have been me, and holding you, a month old by then, I knew that such loss would not be mine alone. I skimmed the headline. Their atrocities seemed so common back then. The story spread into a second day. Reading slightly closer, I saw it was a Howard student who had been killed. I thought perhaps I knew him, but I paid it no further mind. Then on the third day, a photo appeared with the story, and I glimpsed at it and then focused on the portrait, and I saw him there. He was dressed in his formal clothes as though it were his senior prom, and frozen in the amber of his youth. His face was lean, brown, and beautiful, and across that face I saw the open, easy smile of my friend Prince Carmen Jones. I cannot remember what happened next. I think I stumbled back. I think I told your mother what I'd read. I think I called the girl with the long dreads and asked her if it could be true. I think she screamed. What I remember for sure is what I felt. Rage and the old gravity of West Baltimore. The gravity that condemned me to the schools, the streets, the void. Prince Jones had made it through, and still they had taken him. And even though I already knew that I would never believe any account that justified this taking, I sat down to read the story. There were very few details. He had been shot by a PG County officer, not in PG County, not even in D.C., but somewhere in Northern Virginia. Prince had been driving to see his fiancée. He was killed yards from her home. The only witness to the killing of Prince Jones was the killer himself. The officer claimed that Prince had tried to run him over with his Jeep, and I knew that the prosecutors would believe him. Days later, your mother and I packed you into the car, drove down to Washington, left you with your Aunt Camilla, and went to the service for Prince at Rankin Chapel on Howard's campus, where I'd once sat amazed at the parade of activists and intellectuals. Joseph Lowery, Cornel West, Calvin Butts, who preached at that pulpit. I must have seen a great number of old friends there, though I cannot recall precisely who. What I remember is all the people who spoke of Prince's religious zeal, his abiding belief that Jesus was with him. I remember watching the president of the university stand and weep. I remember Dr. Mabel Jones, Prince's mother, speaking of her son's death as a call to move from her comfortable suburban life into activism. I heard several people ask for forgiveness for the officer who shot Prince Jones down. I only vaguely recall my impressions of all of this, but I know that I have always felt great distance from the grieving rituals of my people, and I must have felt it powerfully then. The need to forgive the officer would not have moved me, because even then, in some inchoate form, I knew that Prince was not killed by a single officer so much as he was murdered by this country and all the fears that have marked it from birth. At this moment, the phrase police reform has come into vogue, and the actions of our publicly appointed guardians have attracted attention, presidential and pedestrian. You may have heard the talk of diversity, sensitivity training, and body cameras. These are all fine and applicable, but they underestimate the task and allow the citizens of this country to pretend that there is real distance between their own attitudes and those of the ones appointed to protect them. The truth is that the police reflect America in all of its will and fear, and whatever we might make of this country's criminal justice policy, it cannot be said that it was imposed by a repressive minority. The abuses that have followed from the policies, the sprawling carceral state, the random detention of black people, the torture of subjects, are the product of democratic will. And so to challenge the police is to challenge the American people who send them into the ghettos armed with the same self-generated fears that compel the people who think they are white to flee the cities and into the dream. The problem with the police is not that they are fascists, but that our country is ruled by majoritarian pigs. I knew that some of this even then, sitting in Rankin Chapel, even if I could not yet express it. So forgiving the killer of Prince Jones would have seemed irrelevant to me. The killer was the direct expression of all his country's beliefs, and raised conscious in rejection of a Christian God, I could see no higher purpose in Prince's death. I believed and still do that our bodies are ourselves, that my soul is the voltage conducted through neurons and nerves, and that my spirit is my flesh. Prince Jones was a one of one, and they had destroyed his body, scorched his shoulders and arms, ripped open his back, mangled lung, kidney, and liver. I sat there feeling myself a heretic, believing only in this one-shot life in the body. For the crime of destroying the body of Prince Jones, I did not believe in forgiveness. When the assembled mourners bowed their heads in prayer, I was divided from them because I believed that the void would not answer back. Weeks wore on. Nauseating details slowly dribbled out. The officer was a known liar. A year earlier, he had arrested a man on false evidence. Prosecutors had been forced to drop every case in which this officer was involved. The officer was demoted, restored, then put out on the street to continue his work. Now, through additional reports, a narrative began to take shape. The officer had been dressed like an undercover drug dealer. He'd been sent out to track a man whose build was 5'4" and 250 pounds. We know from the coroner that Prince's body was 6'3" and 211 pounds. We know that the other man was apprehended later. The charges against him were dropped. None of this mattered. We know that his superiors sent this officer to follow Prince from Maryland through Washington, D.C., and into Virginia, where the officer shot Prince several times. We know that the officer confronted Prince with his gun drawn and no badge. We know that the officer claims he shot Prince because Prince tried to run him over with his Jeep. We know that the authorities charged with investigating the shooting did very little to investigate the officer and did everything in their power to investigate Prince Jones. This investigation produced no information that would explain why Prince Jones would suddenly shift his ambitions from college to cop killing. This officer, given maximum power, bore minimum responsibility. He was charged with nothing. He was punished by no one. He returned to his work. There were times when I imagined myself like Prince, tracked through many jurisdictions by a man in a criminal's costume. And I was horrified because I knew what I would have done with such a man confronting me, gun drawn, mere feet from my own family's home. Take care of my baby, your grandmother had said, which was to say, take care of your new family. But I now knew the limits of my caring, the reach of its powers etched by an enemy old as Virginia. I thought of all the beautiful black people I'd seen at the Mecca, all their variation, all their hair, all their language, all their stories and geography, all their stunning humanity, and none of it would save them from the mark of plunder and the gravity of our particular world. And it occurred to me then that you would not escape, that there were awful men who laid plans for you, and I could not stop them. Prince Jones was a superlative of all my fears, and if he, good Christian, scion of a striving class, patron saint of the twice as good, could be forever bound, who then could not? And the plunder was not just of Prince alone. Think of all the love poured into him. Think of the tuitions for Montessori and music lessons. Think of the gasoline expended, the treads worn carting him to football games, basketball tournaments, and Little League. Think of the time spent regulating sleepovers. Think of the surprise birthday parties, the daycare, the reference checks on babysitters. Thinking of World Book and Childcraft. Think of the checks written for family photos. Think of the credit cards charged for vacations. Think of soccer balls, science kits, chemistry sets, racetracks, and model trains. Think of all the embraces, of all the private jokes, customs, greetings, names, dreams, all of the shared knowledge and capacity of a black family injected into that vessel of flesh and bone. And think of how that vessel was taken, shattered on the concrete, and all its holy contents, all that had gone into him sent flowing back to the earth. Think of your mother who had no father, and your grandmother who was abandoned by her father, and your grandfather who was left behind by his father. And think of how Prince's daughter was now drafted into those solemn ranks and deprived of her birthright, that vessel which was her father, which brimmed with 25 years of love and was the investment of her grandparents and was to be her legacy. Now at night I held you in a great fear wide as all our American generations took me. Now I personally understood my father and the old mantra, either I can beat him or the police will. I understood it all, the cable wires, the extension cords, the ritual switch. Black people love their children with a kind of obsession. You are all we have, and you come to us endangered. I think we would like to kill you ourselves before seeing you killed by the streets that America made. That is the philosophy of the disembodied of a people who control nothing, who can protect nothing, who are made to fear not just the criminals among them, but the police who lord over them with all the moral authority of a protection racket. It was only after you that I understood this love, and I understood the grip of my mother's hand. She knew that the galaxy itself could kill me, that all of me could be shattered and all of her legacy spilled upon the curb like bum wine. And no one would be brought to account for this destruction, because my death would not be the fault of any human, but the fault of some unfortunate but immutable fact of race, imposed upon an innocent country by the inscrutable judgment of these invisible gods. The earthquake cannot be subpoenaed. The typhoon will not bend under indictment. They sent the killer of Prince Jones back to work because he was not a killer at all. He was a force of nature, the helpless agent of our world's physical laws. This episode sent me from fear to a rage that burned in me then and animates me now, and will likely leave me on fire for the rest of my days. I still had my journalism, my response in this moment to write. I was lucky I had even that. Most of us are forced to drink our travesties straight and smile about it. I wrote about the history of Prince George's County Police. Nothing had ever felt so essential to me. Here's what I knew at the outset. The officer who killed Prince Jones was black. The politicians who empowered this officer to kill were black. Many of the black politicians, many of them twice as good, seemed unconcerned. How could this be?